Welcome back to More Than Rust. At the end of the last episode, we finally got the gearbox bolted to the floor of the car. Woohoo! So, it makes logical sense to now focus on bolting the engine into the car. Now, as you may be aware, I did have some really long, spindly looking mounts to hold the engine in. However, I very quickly realised they were right in the way for doing any sort of exhaust or, well, anything on the passenger side of the car. So they had to change. What this basically meant is that I'm now having to custom build engine mounts both on the chassis and the engine side. Oh joys. However, to make this a bit easier, I have looked at the V8 rover crossmember. I do happen to have one, so that made it easy. And the V8s actually mount their engines off the front crossmember onto a lower section of the block, and then use a steady bar from up by the wings that comes across to the top of the engine to stop it rolling around so much. So I'm probably going to copy something very similar to that. Now, one of the major differences between the V8 cars and the 4-cylinder cars is where they actually put the engine in the engine bay. You'll notice if you ever look at a V8 car, the engine is pushed forwards quite a long way. You can tell this because if you look at the back of the engine, there's quite a big gap between the back of the engine and where the heat box is. However, in the 4-cylinder cars, the engine is shoved a lot further back. This kind of helps me due to the fact that it means the engine mounts I need to make will be right at the front of the engine, and it almost lines up with the front crossmember as it sits. So, more reasons why the Toyota Beams engine should really go into a P6 rover. That or I'm just delusional at this point. But I'm going with it's meant to be here. Totally. So, stage one of sorting out these engine mounts is getting rid of the old bits off the chassis. This here is the old engine mount pocket where the engine mount used to sit. Unfortunately, first thing that's happened is that has to go. Well, that was easy. Stage 2 time. So, stage 2. This stage I need to figure out where approximately on the crossmember I want my new engine mount to be. So this flat plate here makes great sense. Basically, it's also where the V8s run their mounts off of. And on this engine, it does line up quite well with the bolts here at the front of the engine. So, that's what I'm going to be using. So, now the old mount pockets are gone off the car, and I've found a place for my new mounts to go, I now need to find some new rubber mounts to fit on my mounting pads. Basically, the old mounts don't work because they're designed to fit into a pocket and have the engine's weight pushed directly down top of them. Obviously, these new mounting pads are going to be at an angle, which basically means the engine's weight's going to be pushed into a V. So the mount now has to take both pressure force to pushing them downwards, but also they have to take a side loading force because physically the engine is trying to twist them apart. So, these little edge mounts aren't going to work. Much as they're almost brand new by the looks of them. Sadly, they've got to go in the bin. So, after scouring the internet for hours and hours, subtext here of looked at the V8 rover, I came across these little guys. Now, I know these are Spindle Mounts. I'm sure there's lots of different names for them, but ultimately they're a lump of rubber in the middle with a stud out each side. These ones I believe about 50mm in diameter, and they were fitted to a lot of the early Rover V8 vehicles. When they started making the big V8s, they upgraded them to these. Dimensionally very similar. The only thing that actually changed was the overall diameter went up to 70mm. So, while building these mounts, I'm going to make them both accept the original 50mm version and the bigger 70mm version. basically, I have what's these kicking around, so they're readily available, but I'm not sure how they're going to cope with the power output of the engine. These bigger ones, I know are definitely going to hit the power of the engine, but I'm going to get a hold of this pair, because this is the one and only good one I have. Step 4. Make up a mock mount. This is literally a lump of galvanised steel that I've bolted one of those 50mm mounts to, purely so I will drop it on this cross member and build to it from the engine, because at the moment this engine is floating around a 3-dimensional space. So, now I have my mock-up mount with my rubber mount bolted to it, bolted in a approximate guesstimate area inside the chassis. This obviously will be welded when I've done it all, but for now, a self-type of screw will have to suffice. So, the engine I've set at approximately the height I want it to be at, with a block of wood and a jack. That has been adjusted up and down. This bit of wood over here, this is kind of my fail-safe device in case anything collapses and the engine falls down suddenly. It gets caught by a block of wood. How handy. So, step 5 is to make a bracket that connects these 3 lugs on the side of this block. There's one down here, there's one up here, and there's one down here somewhere, to this rubber mount. Ultimately, this took far too long due to me mismeasuring something at one point and making an engine mount that was 2 times as big as it needed to be. It practically got up to here. It was amazing. Not overly helpful for what I was trying to do, but it was amazing. So I went back to the drawing board and redid it. I've got some photos somewhere of how stupid it looked. Anyway, after a lot of swearing, cutting, grinding and everything else, you end up with one of these new welders. Yeah, things didn't really go to plan. So, after years of service, about 3 of them to be precise, my old second-hand welder finally gave up the ghost. So I had to go out and buy a new one. But this one does TIG welding as well. Fancy. Anyway, after you do lots of welding as well, along with that grinding and bending and hammering and everything else, you end up with one of these lovely buggers. Now, it hasn't been finalised yet. It's merely been sort of stuck together with hopeful welds. However, it does bolt to the car and to that mount. How smancy. And look, the final step does fit. So, things to note about this side of the engine before I go on to the next side. The 3 bolts I've actually used are quite nice because of the fact they are all on the same plane in relation to this face of the block, so they're not all over the place like this. The other thing I like about them is the fact that the 2, one at the top here and the one at the bottom, you can't see underneath the mount here, are actually vertical to each other in relation to the bottom of the block. So measuring those up is nice and easy. Passenger side mount is done. Easy. Look how simple engine mounts are. Sure, the driver's side can't be any more complicated. Oh, you wait. So, next thing, the nice things about this side. Keep that in your mind as I look at the other side and explain the slight complication on that one. So, remember those nice things I said about the other side of the engine block? This side has none of them. I'll cast your eyes first of all to Exhibit A. These 2 bolts at the bottom here. Now they look very similar to what I'm working on the passenger side. However, these ones, both are in line with each other, and that's nice. However, they both lean backwards, so not actually flat to the block face. Other than that, there are actually no more holes anywhere nearby those holes. The next nearest hole to them is all the way up here, which is about the same height difference as the other one on the other side. However, this one is flat. Not only that, it's also set towards the centre of the block more by about 30mm. So now I've got an angled face and a vertical hole. The angled face being about 30 degrees off of vertical, and this extra hole being about 30mm set further into the block than those two bottom holes. In itself, not insurmountable. So I drew up an elaborate design, worked it all out, and was about to make it. Until something struck me. And you may be well ahead of me on this one. But right now I have an engine here. Now, most engines want to have some way of starting. That's the start mode, that's nice and easy, that goes back there somewhere. Don't know what you're talking about, Richard. Well, the reason I'm mentioning this is most start modes run on electricity, which run off batteries, which then get recharged by the engine. I'm sure some of you are caught up now. If I'd made the engine mount down here, in the way I was planning on making it, there wouldn't be any space on here for the alternator. We can't go on the passenger side of the car here because, well, there's a waterway that comes through here, we've got this upper waterway, all the wiring is over this side, there is just no space here for an alternator. So it has to go on this side of the engine block. Now, ages ago, I threw away the original alternator bracket for the Altezza because it sat too low and sat inside this crossmember. So that was a no-go. And I was kind of ignoring the issue until recently when I went, I need to supply that issue before I make an engine mount for this side. Not only have I got to contend with an engine mount on that side, I've also got to somehow make an alternator bracket. Well, I would. Except through happenstance, I had a 3SG engine out of an original series MR2, so an SW20 MR2. You may notice that MR2 is the same engine I stole the pan with, and stuff like that. So, I looked at that engine, thought, where do they mount the alternator on these? Because they're also mounted on that side of the block. Well, it turns out, they mount it on this massive lump of cast iron. And it is actually higher up than the Altezza mounts. Now normally I'd say, man, I just engineer myself one. But with all the different levels of holes and fitments for these things, I really can't be arsed. So, I need to bolt this aside the block before I make the engine mount. Just so I know what I'm working around. So now the alternator bracket is bolted back in, you'll notice I've gained a whole lot of no space. That is due to the fact that the alternator bracket is massive, cast iron and in the bloody way. But I have no choice about it. It's what Toyota's given me. Thanks, Toyota. So, what can I use? Well, with the bracket in here, I can still use the lower two holes I was going to use anyway. What I can't use is a hole further up the block I was going to use, because that's taken up by a lot of this metal. So, I looked at it, and then came to a surprisingly simple solution. I could use the bottom two holes, and this through hole, where the alternator gets held onto the bracket with. All I really need is a longer bolt, and my mount can go on the outside edge of this, and on the back of it, with a nut on it, so it falling off. That's a very simple solution, and I'm sure there's a reason why I can't do it. But no one's told me it yet, so might as well crack on and do that. Someone gave me a whiteboard. Very dangerous. So, ultimately all these random numbers means that works. So, after lots of maths, drawing down a lump of metal, you end up with... Why does that never work, eh? It's always the same... Well, it did. It's just a delayed reaction. Sounds like most of my life. Anyway, you know one of these. Now this really hasn't been finished, I haven't even tied one up yet. But, these lower two holes, go inside my block. These up two tangs on the top here, they go each side of that bracket for the alternator. I think this fits. I haven't tried this one yet. So, as you can see, it fits. Okay, I tell a lie. It's damn snug. What I'm going to need to do is enlarge a couple of the holes on it to make the bolts have a bit more clearance so they don't bind up. But the concept works brilliantly. I now get a nice bracket that should, once I wiggle the engine around a bit more, because it's rolled over a bit, have clearance underneath it so I can put another engine mount. So, that was not too bad for the week's work. Well, I'd say a week. Most of this stuff was done in parallel with me doing the gearbox stuff that came out in the video last week, so it's kind of mostly a 2-3 weeks worth of work here. But it lines up quite well and doesn't look completely out of place. Yeah, I know they look like custom made engine mounts and they're a bit scruffy around the edges, but they'll work. And it'll mean I can actually put an exhaust on the car rather than just having pipes pointing straight out the bonnet or something. That kind of ruins the idea of having a bit of a sleepish build. Now, if you're a bit like me and you're looking at this engine and thinking, it's got an awfully high rake on it, I thought the same thing. That wasn't until I actually measured it up and checked with the sump bolts and stuff and realised that actually the sump sits just above the crossmember line and the bonnet will just about clear it. So it's obviously some optical illusion made by these very, very radical wing shape. So that'll probably about do it for this video. Probably the next video will involve me finalising the mount on the driver's side, cleaning up both the mounts, painting them black. That's a requirement on anything you build. And then I think we're about ready to say the engine is mountable. If you like the video, feel free to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below, all things you dislike about the engine mounts, no doubt, because what else are comments for on YouTube? And I will see you all guys in the next one. See ya!